my view around and pin my video so it'll be my face that's in the screen rather than yours. So the same format as every week. That it feels rather rude of me keeping you on mute, but that's so that the camera doesn't jump to your faces when you ask questions. So do make use of the chat button if you want to ask any questions as we go along. And I will at the end, 10 or 15 minutes before the end, take you off mute, or you can take yourselves off mute right at the end. And then that's the chance you can ask your real life questions. So the benefit of you being here is that you do get to ask questions. So when I send out the recording to the ladies that couldn't come to class, they get a much shorter version. They just get the slot with me in. So from the 40-minute video, they probably only get a 28-minute one back. So they miss out all that juicy stuff at the end when you get to ask those burning questions that you really want to know. So the good news today is I found my turntable, which I was searching for last week. Opened my cupboard door and there it was. I thought I would just show you what we did last week to show, oh, it's probably a bit high now, that is my basket arrangement that we made last week. And you can see, I remember I said I thought the sedum would curl upwards, and it has indeed curled upwards. I can see Sue is just joining us. And just to show you how long things last. So this was where I used the sugar bowl as my water receptacle. So it wasn't particularly big. And I did add more water. I think on 2 occasions I added more water. I've pulled out a few dead things, added a few more things in, but it does still looks really, really good. I'm probably going to use that, crop from that, add fresh flowers into my, what we're making today. So today's charity shop flip, it's all very American to say flip. I don't know whether you like using these Americanese words. I watch loads of videos on YouTube and they'll talk about thrift store flips, charity shop flips, and I've taken that to mean things that you would normally buy from a charity shop. I'm not sure that a thrift shop is the same thing as a charity shop. I think it might be just a general secondhand store, and trying to make good of them. And I love going to charity shops, but the problem being that I've not gone out and the shops are just opening. And of course, charity shops tend to be staffed by volunteers who are retired ladies and gentlemen. So they are probably shielding at home. So I've had to restrain myself for 3 whole months. But what I have done is dived into my own bag of donations I wanted to give away, just seeing whether I could actually make use of what I've already got. And I found a pair of these bags, and you would have seen these if you followed me on my Facebook Live a couple of weeks ago. And of course, you're not going to be able to find a bag like that. It's awful, isn't it? I show you something to do and you say, well, I haven't got a bag like that. Well, I've got a solution for you, which we'll talk about in a minute. But this is quite a handy bag. And the reason I've never used it is it's not very wide. And also it's quite tall in relation to the narrow width. So it just didn't seem massively practical. So I've never used it. Now, you're highly unlikely to have a bag like this, but I'm wondering whether you have got those papery cardboard gift bags. You know, when you go to someone's house and you want to make something look a bit special, gift bags, so that cardboard, sometimes the pattern on, normally with cord handles. You would be able to use the same ideas I'm going to show you using one of those gift bags, and you could keep the pattern on the gift bag, or you could spray paint it if you wanted to have it all, have a blank canvas. And if you really didn't have any gift bags, I think this bag is about the size of a Weetabix box. Just the single column of Weetabix, not the doubles or not the quadruples. And I reckon you could make yourself a gift bag by cutting off the end of the Weetabix box and then making your own handles. So there's lots of ways around this. This is just intended to be a demonstration to give you some ideas. And oh yes, Sue's saying wine bottle bags. You could indeed, wine bottle bags would be great. And also, if you use the bag, so you could use the gift bag for the purpose of giving a gift, or you could use the gift bag to put flowers or a pot plant in. So I'll come and show you that. Actually, I'll show you now, shall I? So there's the before, which is this blank bag. Again, I'm conscious of the fact I'm showing you something pale against the pale of my skin and the pale of the walls behind. But the finished bag looks like that. So I have decorated the handle, put on a little floral motif, and added in this boho tassel and bead area here. So that would make a lovely gift bag and a lovely bottle bag, Sue, if you just, you know, jazzed up the gift. But it would also make, I put a little tumbler inside, and I've had fresh flowers inside my flower bag. You could also put pot plants in as well. So I'm imagining, you know, perhaps if you're buying a herb from the supermarket and, you know, you put it on a flat saucer, it all looks very plain, but perhaps you could put it inside a little bag and make this a plant bag, or you could pot something up you've had from the garden, or a geranium or something like that. So it can be a gift bag, a vase, or a plant bag. So it's entirely up to you. So on with the show. So you don't need very much to make this project. So I have got my bag, I have got some really thick wool, and again, this was a donation, we call it a charity shop find. It was given to me, but it was, I didn't, I had it in my stash, someone gave it to me. And I've chosen something that's quite thick because it takes quite a long time to go around the handle, but if you have all the time in the world, you might want to use something finer, and you've seen me use this at other projects before. This is the crochet yarn that came from my mum's stash, so that's another option. And if you wanted to make the beaded tassel, now I've actually got wooden beads here, but do you remember when we did the farmhouse decor? And again, not everybody was there, but the playbook is on my website if you want to have a look at that. I actually made salt dough beads, so you could use salt dough beads if you made those, or wooden beads. And then I've got a ribbon as well, because I'm into my black gingham at the moment, so quite a narrow black gingham ribbon if you decided you wanted to add a bow. So it's one of those projects where you can layer up. Mary's saying, I'm not sure wine bottles would be any good after use. I think, particularly the wine bottle, isn't it, because they're so tall, they get crumpled a little bit, don't they? But some of them are quite stiff. I will say that I do tend to have quite a stash of them, and actually I end up giving them away because I can't sort of reuse them. But yeah, I think it's worth giving it a go. I think you'll be fine. I do think they're quite tall though. So if you're putting flowers in it, yes, rather than the short tumbler, you'd need a longer highball glass to go in, and then you'd need very long flowers to go in. Perhaps that's what you're meaning there, Mary, but you can confirm that with me at the end. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off a length of my wool. I'm going to show you how you start off, because it takes quite a while. It probably took me to put both handles on to cover them about 15 minutes, which isn't long, but it's too long for this video. And what you could do if you wanted to cheat is glue it on. So you could put a bit of hot glue on the handle, and you could just wrap the wool around, and that would give you, sure you can see that, a smooth handle with a different finish to it. But I preferred the slightly chunkier handle, and I'm going to use a blanket stitch. I don't know if you can remember doing a blanket stitch when you were younger, and that's what gives me this lovely sort of nubbled seam edge around the edge, and just makes the handle more distinctive and more eye-catching. And again, that technique of the blanket stitch is something I used on the woven at home projects, and I know that Elsie followed along with that, but that's another playbook that's on my website if you wanted to look. So here I have just tied a knot. Later on, you will need to get rid of the long end, and the way I did that, because I won't show you at the end, is I snipped it off, and then I got a dab of hot glue, and I just glued that little tail end. What you can do is when you start, you can do your blanket stitch over the starting loop, but you can't do that so easily at the other end. So what I ended up doing was I just tied on to start, tied on to finish, cut the excess wool, and then a dab of hot glue, and I used a skewer, because the hot glue is really hot. I've got the scars to prove it, just to sort of meld it in place. So I will try and show you again how to do a blanket stitch. But if you decide you want to contribute to the lessons, and thank you so much for those of you that are, that it'll be in the YouTube video at the end. So these are private YouTube videos, and you'll actually get a close-up of the camera right over my shoulder doing it. But of course you could always look up, and I'm sure once you start going, you'll remember what to do. And Joan's saying, amazing, you come up with these lovely ideas. I love, oh, Joan, I like doing it, and I do watch lots of videos. And also it's the inspiration that someone shows you something, or you see something in a magazine and you think, oh, I could give that a go. I could put a flower twist on here. So what I'm doing here is I'm making a loop that's standing above my handle, and I get the rest of the wool and I put the end of the wool through the loop. And if you found it easy, you could actually put a sewing needle on here and physically sew it on, or even crochet. Would you be, I think you'd be able to do this with a crochet hook and crochet a, now I'm not a crocheter, but I'm pretty sure you could crochet this on. So I've taken the loop above the handle, and then I take my wool end through the loop. So I will just do, oh, that didn't work. And when you get used to doing it, you can do it without being quite so obvious in your moves. That isn't showing at all, is it? So here I go. Next time, note to self, use black wool. Loop over the handle that's gone above the handle, and then the end you push through. So I'm not going to do this. Oh, I did that wrong again. There. So over the handle and then through the loop. And if you think this is just way too much for you, hot glue it and just spiral your wool on it. So making a loop and then pushing the wool through the loop. Making a loop and then pushing the wool through the loop. Of course, I realise I'm showing you, I'm working towards me. Make the loop and then pull that through. Perhaps that's easier for you to see that way around. I'll do a couple more that way. Make the loop and then pull the end of the yarn through. So you can see that's creating a really nice knobbly top to it. And you can see now why I chose the chunky wool, because if you use that really, really fine crochet wool, you'd be there all day, but you'd have a beautiful, really fine grained piece of work, but it would take you quite a long time to complete. And if you don't fancy that, as I say, a line of hot glue, you know, a few centimeters at a time, and just wrap around, wrap, would give you a great look. One bit of advice I would give you is every so often just push it down, so you're not getting too loose a weave, especially as you go around the curve of the handle. You don't want any gaps. So it's probably when you think you've finished, there's always more room for about 5 more stitches. So I would go through and just sort of, as you go round, stack it quite compactly on top of each other, and do that on both sides. And as I say, it'll take you 15 minutes when you're just doing it yourself, and you'll end up with that. So it's a nice chunky handle, and you could leave it at that. You could think, well, that's job done, I will leave it at that. Or you could decide to add a little bit of embellishment. So what I've got for my embellishment, I'm going to just cut off my wool so it doesn't flap around in my face. So severe haircut there. I have got the tiniest amount of false silk flowers for my embellishments. So this was off a leafy garland, and again the welcome signs. This is what I used on my welcome sign, which I think was the last lot of videos we did. And with all silk flowers, they do come apart in these little components, she says, and you can pull them off. So I'm going to start with 3 leaves, and I got some apple blossom, I think that is, which I've had for years and years and years. And you the tiniest sprig. This is all about making use of things. So it may be that you haven't got false flowers, but perhaps you've got some felt and you could cut out some felt leaves. You might not have flowers, but perhaps you've got some buttons and you could glue or sew on buttons as well. So it's about adapting the ideas a little bit. So what I'm going to do here, this leaf is too big for the size of my basket. It's going to be overwhelming. So what I'm going to do is to reshape the leaf. I'm going to keep the nice tip shape here, but I'm going to slice off a bit at the bottom to make my leaf smaller. So I've gone from that size to that size. And if you were being really precise, you could mock this up to begin with. You could cut out some leaves from a piece of paper and use that as a template. But I am going freestyle here. So I've got myself 3 little leaves. That one's a bit angular. And then I will take my glue. I'm not sure I need that turntable now. I've found it. So taking my glue gun, I will put a dot of glue either on my leaf or my bag. I think I'm going to put it on my leaf. So turn the leaf over and stick it on the side there. I'm getting glue on my fingers and then a little bit there. So I'm going for a 3. 3s are what flower arranging or florists like using. If you use 4 leaves, it just squares off the design and you want it to have a natural flow, and the way you can best achieve that is with odd numbers. So sometimes I do use even numbers, but I would if you're going even, I would go for 2 or I would go for 6. I think it's just avoid the number 4 because you do start to get a square there, and all you'll see is this square. Why have you put a square motif on your basket? Whereas odd numbers do work better, but you can get away with a 2. So that would be the first placement, and then thinking about putting some flowers in. So I have got this tiny bunch and 1 spare flower. Just need to glue that in place. It's falling off a little bit. So the hot glue is pretty much instant, but it does need to be set, and then decide what you want to add in. So I think perhaps, shall I be bold and put all of it in? I'll get rid of that stubby bit here. And I will add some glue on the back. But this could be buttons, it could be beads. And I'll have that coming off there. And I like the way that I've got the most open flower at the top in the center, and that's reinforcing the focal area. And then it peters out. So they've got the part open bud there, and then the tiny bud at the end, and actually the stem ends there. So it trails off, and that's what we were doing when we were using natural flowers, is to put your biggest flower in the middle, and then go for your middle-sized one, and then go for the small at the end. And I've got a loose flower that fell off, and I think I might just add that in at the top, just to complement that focal area there. And these flowers, again, they pull off, so you don't have to use them as they naturally arrived on the sprig. You can pull them off. So you could leave it at that stage, so just leaf and flower. You might decide you wanted to add in a ribbon bow. And I think we've done this a few times before now. So I've got my narrow ribbon. I'm going to cut it off just so it's easier for you to see what I'm doing. And then I take the ribbon, I rest it in my hands, and I twist it over in front. So you get this loop with the cross tails, and then where I'm holding it, where the ribbons cross, I let that bounce back onto that loop, and you can see that I've created my bow. So holding it steady, I'm taking a Florist wine. Again, it's really, really fine. You could do this with a pipe cleaner or another narrow bit of ribbon, and I put it over so I squashed everything down, and my wire is sort of going round like that. It's a bit difficult to show you, but squash it down like that. Can you see that? Squash it here, and then twist either the wires round, or if you prefer, you can hold the wire steady and twist the bow round. So that gives you a little bow, and you can just adjust a little bit, and then you can see already that my ends are starting to fray. So I'm going to, it's a bit too narrow, this ribbon, to do the dovetail, so I'm just going to cut the ribbon off at a slant like that. And then you don't need this wire. The wire was purely there to hold it together. And Sue's saying, is a glue gun burn on my finger? No, I glue gunned myself there. This is the injury from my walk. Remember I told you at the coffee morning yesterday when I used my floristry scissors to cut a path through the brambles at the weekend. And it's getting worse and worse. I'm knocking it around too much. So yes, I need to keep an eye on that. And then we end up with this little stalky stalk of the wire, and I'm going to put my glue on that, cut it as short as I can. If you've got a narrower wire, you might be able to fold the wire back a little bit. I've got little droplets of glue on there, and then I'm going to use that to bury down into behind my flower. And then I've got another detail. So you may decide that you don't like the ribbon, or you may decide, actually, I'm going to add more, I'm going to add more, I'm going to add more. So it's, you know, you stop when you think you're ready to stop. It doesn't matter how much decoration you put on. So I will leave that there so you can see it in the corner. And then the tassel is the same as the way we've made them before, but just a little bit of a recap. I'm going to I'll make the tassel. I don't think you're going to see it in the thick, so I'll make it chunky so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm wrapping it around my fingers and keeping my fingers quite widely spaced. And it depends how chunky you want your tassel as to how many times you go around. So because I have got chunky wool, I don't need to go around many times. So then when that's on my hand, I tie it off. So I've got a piece of the wool that I tie through the middle to hold everything together, and tie that in a double knot. And then you take the second bit of yarn, and that's what you use to create the sort of head of the tassel. And this is when it gets a tiny bit fiddly. The way I do this, because it is quite fiddly to do it, I wrap my yarn around a few times. So I hold a tail because I need to be able to knot it. So I leave myself a bit of leeway, and then I take my yarn and twist it round. So I think it'll probably come down a bit too low there. So you can see I've got a defined head and the tails, and then I tie a knot there. So I need to do that on the hard surface, like so. And then you've got all these different lengths according to the bits where you've tied it all off. I don't worry about those. So I go through the loops and I cut through all the loops. And then finally I go through and hold the tassel in my hand, and then I even it all off. So come through and give it a haircut. And then you've got a really lovely chunky tassel like that. So again, you could hang that onto your, you can see how it's too big, so it's another matter in scale. So that's why I use the cotton crochet yarn for my tassel. But you can see there, hopefully, that it's too big. So hence the finer cotton yarn worked much better. So you could add the tassel on its own, or you could use these threads at the top to add in some beads. Now the problem being here is that I've got such thick wool, it won't fit so easily through my beads. Let's see if I can push it through using my kebab stick as a needle. Push that through. But again, if you don't have these, they're not vital. So, Joan, you asked me a very long question there. I think I'm going to cut that out because I can't get too lots of wool in the up through the bead. So you then add your tassels on if that's what you wanted. I can see that little bit of wool is annoying me up there as well, so I'm going to cut that off. When you're thinking about putting your flowers in, it doesn't matter at all where you put your flowers, because we're not being formally assessed on our work. We're not entering a competition. It's about you doing what you really, really like. So I would say it's about creating a central area of interest. So with my flowers, you can see when you look at my bag, what is it you notice first? You know, perhaps it's the tassel. Is it this area here? This is just a really small arrangement. But I would say you want to put your most impactful flower, the biggest flower. Actually, everything I've got in this is tiny, so there's not much gradation in size. But you want to aim for your biggest flower in the middle, and then your finer materials at the outside edge. So perhaps it's better if I show you that one. So you can see that my most open flower is right in the centre, and that's the focal area. And then your eye travels down through smaller and smaller to smaller to smallest. And that's the way it's done. So if you were having an arrangement where you were making a big pedestal, you'd have it the other way up. That you'd have your focal flower at the bottom, and then the pedestal would taper out towards the top, but also it would taper out towards the sides. as well. And that's just a really good way. You'll notice when it looks like someone's done it wrong, and I think that's the best way of doing it, that and it's just keeping your eyes open really, just to notice what's going on around. So if I had put the smallest flower here and the biggest flower here, I think you would have thought that just looks a tiny bit strange. And sometimes it's just a matter of switching the place of the flowers around. And that's when it's really useful as well, that you can sketch something out before you start. So I knew in my mind what I was doing. Perhaps I've skipped a process, because I should have started out perhaps with drawing out my little bag on a piece of paper, deciding how many leaves I want, then I want to add in a tassel and a bow, and then sketch out from there. I would say I always think in threes: small, medium and large. So if you're being technical, it's your focal flower, your transitional and your filler flower, but I talk about wow flowers, in-betweeny flowers, and then wispy flowers at the end, but it's always that sort of rule of threes. So that would be the arrangement. And then what you would do, I'm not adding water because I'm going to spill it. I've got a tumbler. Imagine my tumbler with water, or my little pot plant, that you would put that inside your gift bag. The advantage of doing that is all of a sudden it makes the gift bag much more robust, and it'll actually stand up on its own, whereas before it was a little bit flimsy. And then you could add in your flowers. I've made a posy there of garden flowers, and I decided that I would, because I felt the bag was so pretty, that I didn't want my flowers to compete with it. So I've gone with quite a herby looking arrangement, and actually it's scented. I've got lavender, rosemary and another herb. I can't remember it, so I won't bother thinking about it. And I specifically went for things that were interesting to look at, but they didn't have any colour to them, because I thought actually the attractiveness of this came from the little detail on the side. So if I go back to my basket of flowers from the other week, I could go back in and I could crop things from this basket and keep adding in. I've got some poppy heads over here, which are doing really well. And the same with any flower arrangement, that you recut your stems at an angle, take off any leaves that are going to be inside the water, or in the water, because you don't want them to rot, and then you add those in. So you don't need many flowers, because it's the basket and the trimmings which are doing all the talking for you. And you just need to make sure that when you're arranging, that you actually are aiming your flowers actually into your cup of water. So whether you arrange it sort of separately and do your arrangement in a vase, but you can see there where it all fallen apart, which is why I tied the first bunch together. But once you get it into your bag, it all closes up a little bit. But that would be one way of doing it. I could put it all into my little vase here, chopping off from previous arrangements. And I've even got some cow parsley. This cow parsley must be 2 weeks old, I think, by now. So I can reuse all these little bits and reinvent them to make quite an informal arrangement. And when I put that back into the little gift bag, it all sits up properly. So ladies, I think probably the time has come for you to take yourselves off mute and we can ask some questions. But that is the finished bag. I've purposefully kept the flowers themselves quite low key. But you can imagine if you had a pot of basil in there or a pot of mint, it's a very decorative way of having